The morning air felt different that day. William stood by the tall windows of Kensington Palace, watching the early sunlight paint golden streaks across the courtyard. His hands trembled slightly as he held the cup of tea that had grown cold. In his grip, today would be one of the hardest days of his life, and he knew it. Kate entered the room quietly, her footsteps soft on the polished wooden floor. She had been up since dawn, unable to sleep, her mind racing with memories and emotions she couldn't quite put into words. Her usually bright eyes were red from tears she had shed in private, away from the cameras and the world that watched there. Every move. "The car will be here soon," she whispered, placing a gentle hand on William's shoulder. He turned to face her, and for a moment they were not the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. They were simply two people who had lost someone they loved deeply. Someone who had been like a second mother to William and a grandmother figure to Kate. The person they were mourning today had been a pillar of strength in their lives. She had been there when William was just a young boy, struggling to understand why his mother wasn't coming home. She had held him when he cried, told him stories when he couldn't sleep, and taught him that even in the darkest times, there was still love and hope to be found. For Kate, this woman had been a bridge between her old life and her new one as a member of the royal family. When Kate felt overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibilities, when the press seemed too harsh, or when she doubted herself, this woman had been there with a warm smile and wise words. She had taught Kate how to find her own voice while honoring the traditions that came with her position now as they prepared to say their final goodbye. Both William and Kate felt the weight of loss pressing down on their hearts. The woman who had been their rock, their confidant, and their source of unconditional love was gone. The world felt a little less bright without her presence. The children had asked questions that morning, innocent voices cutting through the heavy atmosphere of the palace. They didn't fully understand why everyone seemed so sad, why their parents' voices were quieter than usual, or why there were so many serious-looking people coming and going. William and Kate had done their best to explain, using simple words. That wouldn't frighten them, but would help them understand the importance of the day ahead. As they got dressed in their formal black attire, memories flooded back. William remembered lazy Sunday afternoons spent in her sitting room, where she would listen to his worries about school, about growing up in the public eye, about the pressure he felt to live up to his mother's memory. She never judged him, never made him feel like his feelings were wrong or silly. Instead, she would make him his favorite tea and remind him that he was loved just for being himself. Kate thought about the first time she had met this remarkable woman. She had been nervous, unsure of herself, worried about making a good impression. But within minutes, she had been put at ease by the woman's genuine warmth and interest in her life. They had talked about everything from Kate's studies to her family, and by the end of that first meeting, Kate knew she had found someone special. The morning news was full of tributes from people whose lives had been touched by this woman's kindness. Politicians spoke of her wisdom and guidance. Charity workers remembered her generosity, and ordinary people shared stories of how she had made time for them, made them feel important and heard. Reading these tributes, William and Kate were reminded that their grief was shared by millions of people around the world, but their loss felt uniquely personal. This wasn't just about losing a public figure or someone important to the nation. This was about losing someone who had been there for the quiet moments, the private struggles, the small victories that never made the newspapers. She had been there when William had his first real heartbreak, offering tissues and chocolate biscuits. She had been there when Kate had worried about her wedding dress fitting properly, reassuring her with gentle humor that everything would be perfect. Palace staff moved around them with quiet efficiency, but even they seemed affected by the sadness that hung in the air. Many of them had worked with this woman for years, had seen her kindness extend to everyone she met, regardless of their position or status. She had remembered their birthdays, asked about their families, and always had time for a kind word or a listening ear. As the time approached to leave for the memorial service, William took Kate's hand in his. Her fingers were cold, and he could feel them shaking slightly. He squeezed gently, a silent promise that they would get through this together. Just as they had gotten through everything else in their lives, they stood together for a moment in their private sitting room, surrounded by photographs that captured happier times. There she was in so many of the pictures, smiling at family gatherings, playing with the children, sharing quiet moments with them. Her absence from future photographs would be a constant reminder of what they had lost. But these memories would also be a source of comfort in the difficult days ahead. The sound of car engines in the courtyard signaled that it was time to go. William straightened his tie one last time, and Kate checked her reflection in the mirror, making sure her hat was positioned correctly and that her makeup covered the traces of her tears. They had a duty to perform today, a public role to play, in honoring someone who had meant so much to so many people, but beneath their composed exterior, their hearts were breaking. As they walked toward the door that would take them to the waiting cars, to the crowds of mourners, to the cameras and the ceremony, they carried with them the weight of their private grief and the precious memories of a woman who had loved them unconditionally and had taught them so much about love, duty, and finding strength in the darkest of times. The journey to Westminster Abbey felt longer than usual, despite the roads being cleared for their convoy. William sat in silence, staring out at the crowds of people lining the streets. Many held flowers, others wiped tears from their eyes, and some simply stood in respectful silence as the royal cars passed by. The outpouring of love and grief from ordinary people was overwhelming and comforting at the same time. Kate watched the faces in the crowd, recognizing in them the same sense of loss she felt in her own heart. Children held small bouquets, elderly. People leaned on walking sticks to maintain their positions along the route, and families stood together, united in their shared sorrow. It was clear that the woman they were mourning had touched lives far beyond the palace walls. The radio in their car crackled quietly with security updates, but neither William nor Kate was really listening. Their minds were occupied with thoughts of what lay ahead. They knew that once they stepped out of the car, they would need to be strong, not just for themselves, but for everyone who was watching and grieving alongside them. William thought about the speech he would need to give later. He had written and rewritten it dozens of times, struggling to find words that could adequately express what this woman had meant to him and to the nation. How do you sum up a lifetime of love, guidance, and unwavering support in just a few minutes? How do you share the private moments that meant the most without losing the dignity and respect that such an occasion demanded? As their car approached the Abbey, you could see the magnificent building rising before them, its ancient stones holding centuries of history within their walls. This was where William and Kate had been married, where they had promised to love and support each other through whatever life might bring. Now they were returning under very different circumstances, but the building's sense of permanence and strength offered some comfort. The Abbey was already filled with dignitaries, family members, and friends, all dressed in black, all sharing in the collective grief of the day. But William and Kate knew that beyond the formal ceremony, beyond the protocol and the carefully planned proceedings, this was fundamentally about celebrating the life of someone extraordinary. Kate remembered the last conversation she had with the woman they were honoring. It had been just a few weeks before her passing, a quiet afternoon when they had sat together in the palace gardens. The woman had been weaker then, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and her interest in Kate's life and the children's activities was as genuine as always. They had talked about the future, about the children's education, about Kate's charity work, and about the small, everyday things that make life meaningful. The woman had given Kate some advice about finding balance between public duties and private happiness, words that Kate now treasured as among the last gifts she had received from someone who had become like a second mother to her. William's memories of that final conversation were similar, but different. He had gone to visit specifically because he had sensed that time might be running short. They had spoken of his mother, of the challenges of royal life, and of the importance of protecting what truly mattered. She had made him promise to always put his family first, to remember that being a good husband and father was more important than any royal duty. The car slowed as they approached the Abbey steps. Outside, they could see the carefully coordinated arrangements that had been planned for weeks. Military personnel stood at attention. Religious leaders waited to greet them, and camera crews positioned themselves to capture every moment for the millions of people around. The world who wanted to pay their respects but couldn't be there in person. Kate checked her appearance one final time, smoothing down her black dress and adjusting her hat. She had chosen her outfit carefully, wanting to look appropriate and respectful, while also wearing something that would have made the woman they were mourning proud. She wore a simple string of pearls that had been a gift years earlier, a tangible connection to happier times. William straightened his military medals and took a deep breath. He had worn his uniform with pride on many occasions, but today it felt heavier somehow, weighted with the significance of the moment. These medals represented his service to his country. But today he was also serving as a grandson, a man who had lost someone irreplaceable. The car door opened, and suddenly the sounds of the outside world rushed in. There was the rustle of clothing. As hundreds of people shifted in their positions, the quiet murmur of voices, the clicking of camera shutters, and underneath it all, a profound sense of reverence and respect. William stepped out first, then turned to help Kate. For just a moment, as their hands touched, they drew strength from each other. They had faced many challenges together as a couple, but this felt different. This was about honoring someone who had shaped who they were as individuals and as a family. The Abbey steps stretched before them, leading up to the massive wooden doors that would soon close behind the gathered mourners. But first there were hands to shake, words of condolence to receive gracefully, and the complex choreography of a state funeral to navigate. People approached them with genuine sympathy in their eyes. Some were old family friends who had known the deceased for decades. Others were government officials performing their duties. And still others were representatives of the many charities and organizations that had benefited from the woman's patronage and support over the years. Each interaction required William and Kate to maintain their composure while genuinely acknowledging the shared loss. They had learned over the years how to be both public figures and private people. But today that balance felt more delicate than ever as they climbed the steps toward the Abbey entrance. They could feel the weight of history around them. This building had seen the coronations of monarchs, the weddings of princes and princesses, and the funerals of some of Britain's most beloved figures. Today it would witness another chapter in that long story, and William and Kate were honored to be part of it, even in their grief. Inside Westminster Abbey, the atmosphere was both solemn and beautiful. Hundreds of candles flickered in the ancient space, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls that had witnessed so much history. The magnificent architecture seemed to embrace everyone present, creating a sense of unity among the mourners who had come from all walks of life to pay their respects. William and Kate were escorted to their seats in the front. As they walked down the aisle, they could feel the eyes of everyone present upon them. But there was no judgment in those gazes, only shared sympathy and understanding. They nodded respectfully to familiar faces in the crowd, acknowledging the presence of world leaders, family friends, and representatives from countless organizations that had been touched by the woman's charitable work. The order of service lay before them, its pages outlining readings, hymns, and tributes that had been carefully chosen to reflect the life and values of the person they were honoring. Kate ran her fingers over the program, noting that several of her favorite hymns had been selected. Songs that held special meaning from family gatherings and quiet moments of reflection over the years. The service began with the haunting sound of the Abbey's organ, its deep notes filling every corner of the ancient building. The music seemed to carry with it all the emotions that words couldn't express: the love, the loss, the gratitude for a life well lived, and the sadness of saying goodbye. William felt his throat tighten as the familiar melody washed over him, bringing back memories of happier occasions when they had heard this same music in celebration rather than mourning. The first reading was delivered by a close family friend, someone who had known the deceased for more than 50 years. His voice carried clearly through the Abbey as he spoke words of comfort and hope, reminding everyone present that while they were gathered in sorrow, they were also there to celebrate an extraordinary life that had touched countless others. Kate listened intently to every word, finding comfort in the familiar passages that spoke of love enduring beyond death and of the impact that one person's kindness could have on the world. She thought about the many ways this woman had demonstrated these truths throughout her life, never seeking recognition for her good deeds, but simply living according to her deeply held beliefs. It's about service and compassion. When it came time for the congregation to sing, hundreds of voices joined together in harmony. The sound was incredibly moving, representing people from different countries, different backgrounds, different faiths, all united in their respect for someone who had treated everyone with equal dignity and kindness. William's voice caught slightly on the familiar words, but he continued singing, finding strength in the collective expression of love and remembrance. The main eulogy was delivered by someone who had worked closely with the deceased on numerous charitable projects over the years. The speaker painted a picture of a woman who was driven not by a desire for recognition, but by a genuine desire to make the world a better place. Stories were shared of quiet visits to hospitals, of handwritten letters to people facing difficult times, and of the way she could make anyone feel like the most important person in the room. Simply by giving them her full attention, William and Kate exchanged glances during some of these stories. Recognizing the woman they had known and loved in these public examples of her character, they remembered similar moments from their private experiences with her. The way she had listened without judgment when they faced difficult decisions. The way she had offered practical help alongside emotional support. And the way she had always put the needs of others before her own comfort or convenience. The Abbey fell completely silent during one particularly moving part of the eulogy. When the speaker described the woman's final weeks, despite her failing health, she had continued to write thank you notes to staff members, to ask about the well-being of people she cared about, and to express concern for causes that were close to her heart. Her final thoughts had been for others, just as they had been throughout her life. Kate felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she listened to these details. She remembered visiting during those final weeks, struck by how the woman had seemed more concerned about Kate's own well-being than her own declining health. Even facing the end of her life, she had remained focused on giving comfort and support to those around her. A children's choir performed the next piece, their pure voices soaring up to the Abbey's vaulted ceiling. Many of these children came from schools and programs that had been supported by the woman's charitable work over the years. Their presence represented the future she had helped to nurture, the young lives she had touched through her commitment to education and opportunity for all. William watched the young faces as they sang, thinking about his own children and the lessons they would learn from this day. He wanted them to understand not just the sadness of loss, but the beauty of a life lived in service to others. He wanted them to see that true greatness came not from titles or positions, but from the daily choice to treat others with kindness and respect. The service continued with readings from various religious traditions, reflecting the woman's belief that different faiths could work together for the common good. Representatives from Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and other traditions each offered prayers and reflections, demonstrating the inclusive spirit that had characterized her approach to life and service. As each speaker took their turn at the podium, a fuller picture emerged of someone who had been truly remarkable in her ordinariness. She hadn't sought to change the world through grand gestures or dramatic statements, but through countless small acts of kindness, through consistent dedication to her duties, and through the example she set in her daily interactions with others. The most moving moment came when a young person who had been helped by one of her charity programs stood up to speak. With a shaking voice but clear conviction, they described how the woman's support had changed the trajectory of their life, providing opportunities they never would have had otherwise. The simple dignity of this tribute, coming from someone whose life had been directly transformed, captured the essence of what made this woman so special. As the formal speeches concluded, and the service moved toward its final hymn, Kate prepared themselves for what they knew would be the most difficult part of the day. Soon, it would be time for William to speak, to find words that could somehow express what this woman had meant, not just to him personally, but to everyone whose lives she had touched. The moment arrived when William had to stand and make his way to the podium. His legs felt unsteady as he rose from his seat, and Kate gave his hand a gentle squeeze of encouragement before releasing it. The walk to the front of the Abbey felt impossibly long, with hundreds of pairs of eyes following his every step. The weight of expectation was enormous. He needed to speak, not just for himself, but for everyone who was grieving. William paused for a moment before beginning, looking out at the sea of faces before him. He could see family members in the front rows, their own eyes red with tears. Behind them sat world leaders, dignitaries, and representatives from dozens of countries who had come to pay their respects. But scattered throughout the congregation were also ordinary people whose lives had been touched by the woman they were mourning, teachers from schools she had visited, nurses from hospitals where she had volunteered, children from youth programs she had supported. Taking a deep breath, William began to speak. His voice was steady at first, drawing on years of public speaking experience, but there was an unmistakable tremor of emotion underneath his composed exterior. He started by thanking everyone for coming, acknowledging that their presence was a testament to the impact this remarkable woman had made on so many lives. He spoke about her dedication to duty, how she had approached every engagement, every meeting, every public appearance with the same level of commitment and genuine interest in the people she met. But he also shared more personal memories, the way she had made him feel safe and loved during the most difficult periods of his childhood. How she had taught him that true strength came from caring for others rather than from power or position. William's voice began to break slightly as he described the woman's relationship with his own children. She had been a devoted great-grandmother, always remembering their birthdays, their favorite games, their small achievements and disappointments. She had taught them through her example that kindness was the most important quality anyone could possess, and that every person they met deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. The Abbey was completely silent as William continued, sharing stories that revealed the private person behind the public figure. He talked about her sense of humor, her love of simple pleasures like afternoon tea and garden walks, her concern for the environment long before it became fashionable, and her unwavering belief that everyone had something valuable to contribute to the world. Kate watched from her seat, heart breaking for her husband as she saw him struggle to maintain his composure. She knew how much this speech meant to him, how desperately he wanted to honor this woman's memory, while also expressing his personal grief. The weight of representing not just his own feelings, but the feelings of an entire nation was almost overwhelming. When William spoke about the woman's final months, his voice faltered completely for several seconds. He had to pause, take a breath, and gather himself before continuing. The vulnerability he showed in that moment was deeply human and made his words even more powerful. Here was someone who, despite his royal training and public responsibilities, was simply a man mourning someone he had loved deeply. He described how, even as her health declined, she had continued to worry about others more than herself, had made sure that her staff were taken care of, that her charitable commitments were properly transferred to others, and that the people she cared about knew how much they meant to her. Her final conversations with William had been about his happiness, his family's well-being, and her hopes for his future. The congregation listened in rapt attention as William shared her final piece of advice to him. She had told him that the greatest legacy anyone could leave was not in monuments or grand achievements, but in the lives they had touched and the kindness they had spread. She had reminded him that his most important job was not as a prince or a future king, but as a husband, father, and human being. As William neared the end of his speech, his emotions became harder to control. His voice cracked as he spoke about the hold that her death had left in his life and in the lives of everyone who had known her. He admitted that he wasn't sure how they would go on without her wisdom, her comfort, and her unconditional love. But then, drawing on the strength she had taught him to find within himself, William's voice grew stronger again. He spoke about how her values would live on through everyone she had influenced, how her charitable work would continue through the organizations she had supported, and how her example of service and compassion would inspire future generations. He concluded by addressing her directly, as if she could hear him from wherever she now was. He thanked her for everything she had given him, promised that he would try to live up to the example she had set, and assured her that she would never be forgotten. His final words were simple but profound. "You taught us that love is the only thing that truly matters, and we will carry that love forward in everything we do." The abbey remained completely silent for several long moments after William finished speaking. The power of his words, the raw emotion he had shown, and the love that had motivated every sentence had moved everyone present to tears. Even the most experienced public figures in attendance were visibly affected by the honesty and vulnerability William had displayed. As William made his way back to his seat, we could see that Kate was crying openly now, no longer trying to hide her tears behind her composed public facade. When he sat down beside her, she took his hand again, and they drew comfort from each other's presence in their shared grief. The final hymn began, and once again hundreds of voices joined together, but now there was something different in the sound. The words seemed to carry with them not just sadness for what had been lost, but gratitude for what had been given. The woman they were mourning had shown them all what it meant to live a life of purpose and meaning, and her example would continue to guide them long after this day was over. As the service moved toward its conclusion, William and Kate prepared themselves for the final goodbye. Soon they would follow the coffin out of the abbey, past the crowds of mourners, to the private burial service where only family would be present. The public part of their grief would be over, but the journey of learning to live without someone so important to them was just beginning. The final blessing echoed through Westminster Abbey as the service drew to its close. The Archbishop's words of hope and comfort seemed to hang in the air, offering a sense of peace to the hundreds of mourners who had gathered to say goodbye. But for William and Kate, the most difficult part of the day was still ahead, the moment when they would have to watch the coffin leave the abbey and begin its final journey. The pallbearers, chosen from among the military units that the deceased had patronized throughout her life, moved with perfect precision and deep respect. Each step they took was measured and deliberate, carrying not just a physical burden, but the weight of a nation's grief. William watched them with profound gratitude, knowing that these men and women understood the honor they had been given and the responsibility they carried. As the procession began to move down the aisle, the abbey organ played a piece that had been specifically requested by the woman before her death. The melody was both mournful and uplifting, reflecting her belief that death was not an ending, but a transition, and that those left behind should find comfort in the love and memories they carried forward. Kate felt her composure threatening to break completely as the coffin passed by their seats. This was the moment that made the loss feel final and irreversible. All the times she had hoped for one more conversation, one more piece of advice, one more warm hug, came rushing back. To her, the finality of death had never felt more real or more painful. William stood as the coffin approached, his military training taking over even as his heart was breaking. He saluted with perfect form, a gesture that honored both the woman he had loved and the values she had instilled in him about duty and service. But behind that formal gesture was a grandson saying goodbye to someone who had been his anchor through life's storms. The congregation began to file out behind the coffin, creating a river of black-clad mourners flowing toward the abbey doors. World leaders walked alongside charity workers. Aristocrats mingled with ordinary citizens, and people of all ages and backgrounds united in their shared loss. It was exactly the kind of gathering the deceased would have loved, diverse, inclusive, and focused on what brought people together rather than what divided them. Outside the abbey, the crowd stretched as far as the eye could see. Thousands of people had gathered along the route, many having waited for hours in the cold morning air just to be part of this final farewell. They threw flowers as the hearse passed, creating a carpet of color that brightened the somber day. Children waved small flags, elderly people stood with the support of walking sticks, and families held each other close as they watched history unfold before their eyes. William and Kate followed in their car, watching through the windows as the public displayed their love and respect. The sight of so many people taking time from their own lives to honor someone they might never have met personally was deeply moving. It demonstrated the profound impact that one person's commitment to service and kindness could have on an entire nation and beyond. The journey to the private burial site was shorter, but felt eternal. This would be the last time they traveled together with the woman who had been such an important part of their lives. After today, visits to see her would mean standing beside a gravestone, talking to memories instead of hearing her voice respond with wisdom and love. The private burial service was held in a small chapel that had special meaning to the family. Only close relatives and a few longtime friends were present, creating an intimate atmosphere that was very different from the grand ceremony at the Abbey. Here there were no cameras, no formal protocol, just people who had loved someone extraordinary, saying their final goodbyes. The simplicity of this second service made it even more emotional. Without the structure of a formal ceremony to provide framework, the raw grief felt more immediate and overwhelming. William found himself thinking about all the conversations they would never have, all the advice he would need to find elsewhere, all the family gatherings that would feel incomplete without her presence. Kate stood close to William throughout the burial service, children beside them, all trying to understand and process the magnitude of their loss. The children had loved their great-grandmother deeply, and seeing their confusion and sadness added another layer of heartbreak to an already difficult day. As the final prayers were said and the coffin was lowered into the ground, a profound silence settled over the small gathering. This was the moment they had all been dreading, the absolute finality of death, the point of no return. Each person present threw a handful of earth onto the coffin, a tradition that felt both ancient and deeply personal. William was the last to approach the grave. He stood there for several long minutes, silently communicating with someone who could no longer respond, but whose influence on his life would continue forever. He made promises about carrying forward her values, about protecting the causes she had cared about, and about being the kind of person she had raised him to be. When he finally stepped back, Kate took his arm, and together they walked away from the graveside. Behind them lay someone who had shaped their lives in countless ways. Ahead of them lay the challenge of continuing without her guidance and support, but carrying with them everything she had taught them about love, service, and the importance of putting others before yourself. The small group of mourners made their way back to the chapel where a reception had been arranged. It was here, in quiet conversations over tea and sandwiches, that the real work of grieving began. People shared their favorite memories, laughed through their tears at funny stories, and began the slow process of adjusting to a world without someone who had been such a constant presence in their lives. William and Kate moved through the gathering, accepting condolences and sharing their own memories with others who had known and loved the woman they were mourning. Each conversation was a small step in the journey of healing, a way of keeping her memory alive through the stories and experiences they shared with others who understood their loss. In the days that followed the funeral, William and Kate found themselves navigating a new reality without the woman who had been their constant source of strength and wisdom. The palace felt different somehow, quieter and less warm, as if her absence had changed the very atmosphere of their home. Every familiar space held memories of conversations, laughter, and moments of quiet companionship that now existed only in their hearts. The children struggled to understand why their beloved great-grandmother wouldn't be coming to visit anymore. They asked innocent questions that pierced through their parents' carefully maintained composure. When would she be back? Could they call her on the phone? Why couldn't they visit her like they used to? William and Kate did their best to explain death in terms their young minds could grasp, but they found themselves learning, alongside their children, about how to cope with such a profound loss. Letters and messages of condolence poured in from around the world. Heads of state, celebrities, and ordinary citizens all took time to share their memories and express their sympathy. But perhaps the most moving tributes came from people whose lives had been touched by the woman's charitable work. Nurses who remembered her hospital visits, teachers from schools she had supported, young people who had benefited from programs she had championed. Kate spent hours reading through these letters, finding comfort in the stories people shared about her mother-in-law's kindness and generosity. One letter from a homeless shelter described how she had visited quietly, without publicity, and had sat talking with residents for hours, treating each person with dignity and genuine interest in their stories. Another came from a children's hospital, where nurses remembered how she had instinctively known which young patients needed extra comfort and had always taken. Time to sit beside their beds, William threw himself into his royal duties with renewed determination, feeling that the best way to honor the woman's memory was to continue the work she had started. He visited the charities she had supported, meeting with staff members and volunteers who were struggling with their own grief while trying to carry on her legacy. In these visits, he found both comfort and purpose, seeing firsthand how her influence would continue to make a difference in people's lives. The first family gathering without her was particularly difficult. The empty chair at the dinner table seemed to dominate the room, and conversations felt stilted and incomplete without her gentle presence to bridge generational gaps and keep everyone connected. The children kept looking toward the door as if expecting her to arrive fashionably late with gifts and stories about her day. But gradually, as weeks turned into months, the family began to find new rhythms. They established traditions to honor her memory, lighting a candle on special occasions, visiting her favorite gardens, continuing to support the causes that had been closest to her heart. These rituals helped them feel connected to her even in her absence, and gave the children concrete ways to remember their great-grandmother Kate, discovered that she had inherited more than just jewelry and personal items from the woman she had come to love as a second mother. She found herself drawing on lessons learned through their many conversations, approaching challenges with the same thoughtful consideration and genuine care for others that had characterized her mentor's approach to life. When facing difficult decisions about charity work or family matters, Kate would often ask herself what advice the older woman would have given. William experienced moments when he could almost hear her voice offering guidance or gentle correction. During particularly stressful periods, he would remember her reminders about the importance of balance, about not letting duty overwhelm the simple joys of family life. Her influence had become so much a part of who he was that losing her felt like losing a piece of himself. The first anniversary of her death approached with a mixture of anticipation and dread. William and Kate knew that this milestone would bring back all the raw emotions of their initial loss, but they also saw it as an opportunity to celebrate everything she had given them and to publicly acknowledge the ongoing impact of her legacy. They decided to establish a foundation in her name, focusing on the causes that had been closest to her heart: education for disadvantaged children, support for the elderly, and environmental conservation. The announcement of this foundation brought them their first real joy since her passing, as they realized they had found a meaningful way to channel their grief into something positive and lasting. The planning process for the foundation's launch brought the family together in a new way. They spent hours discussing her values, her approach to charitable work, and the specific ways she had made a difference in people's lives. These conversations helped them process their grief while also ensuring that her legacy would continue in a manner that truly reflected who she had been. On the anniversary of her death, William and Kate returned to the small chapel where she was buried. They brought flowers from the palace gardens she had loved so much, including roses she had planted herself years earlier. Standing beside her grave, they felt a sense of peace they hadn't experienced since losing her. The sharp edge of their grief had softened into something more manageable, a gentle sadness, mixed with profound gratitude for having had her in their lives. The children had grown and changed in the years since her death, and William and Kate marveled at how they had incorporated their great-grandmother's lessons into their own young lives. They showed increased kindness to their classmates, asked thoughtful questions about people less fortunate than themselves, and often mentioned things she had taught them about treating everyone with respect, regardless of their position in life. As they drove home from the cemetery that evening, Kate reflected on how much they had all grown through the experience of loss. While nothing could fill the void left by such an important person's absence, they had learned to find comfort in continuing her work and living according to the values she had instilled in them. Her death had taught them about the preciousness of time, the importance of expressing love while it could still be heard, and the way that one person's commitment to kindness could ripple outward to touch countless lives. William looked out at the countryside, passing by their car window, and felt his grandmother's presence in a different way than before. She was no longer physically with them, but her influence was woven so deeply into who they had become that she would always be part of their family story. The foundation they were launching, the charitable work they would continue, the way they raised their children, and the kindness they showed to others would all be living memorials to a woman who had dedicated her life to making the world a better place. That night, as they tucked their children into bed, William and Kate told them stories about their great-grandmother's life, helping them understand that while death had separated them physically, the love and lessons she had shared would always be with them. The children fell asleep peacefully, comforted by the knowledge that the special woman, who had loved them so much, was still watching over them in her own way. In the quiet of their bedroom later that evening, William and Kate talked about the future and how they would continue to honor the memory of someone who had meant so much to them. They made plans for the foundation's first projects, discussed ways to involve their children in charitable work as they grew older, and promised each other that they would never let the demands of royal life overshadow the simple human values. That had been her greatest gift to them. As sleep finally came, they carried with them the peace that comes from knowing that love transcends death, that the impact of a life well lived continues long after that life has ended, and that the best way to honor someone's memory is to live according to the principles they held dear. The woman they had loved and lost would always be part of their story, not as a source of sadness, but as an inspiration to be better people and to use their privileged position to help others whenever possible. The silence that had swept the crowd during her memorial service had been filled with love, respect, and the recognition that they had witnessed the celebration of a truly extraordinary life. Now, in the quiet moments of their own lives, William and Kate found that same sense of reverence and gratitude, knowing that they had been blessed to love and be loved by someone so remarkable, and that her legacy would continue through them for generations to come.